So okay, let's talk about conflict between inflation and unemployment. So we've done growth and inflation, and we've done growth and unemployment, which gives you an option, well, two options for a growth essay, one option for an inflation essay, one option for an unemployment essay. We'll also do inflation and unemployment. That's probably the second most common topic outside of growth. And the conflict here is represented by something called the Phillips curve, or the short run Phillips curve, which has inflation on the Y and unemployment on the X. And if you make this point, all you really need to do is just like explain this diagram, literally just tell the examiner, we can see from the short run Phillips curve that if you want to reduce the level of inflation from PL1 to PL2, you must accept an increased level of unemployment. So if you reduce inflation, you increase unemployment. And if you were to go the other way and reduce unemployment, you would increase inflation. So the short run Phillips curve is not a theoretical model like ADAS or demand and supply. It is much like the graph I showed you earlier, Yuval Noah Harari. It's just showing a correlation based on statistical data. This is not a theory of how it works. This is a guy called Phillips measuring inflation and unemployment in the UK in like 50s and 60s, I think. And then he plotted the results in a graph and he was like, ooh, look at this trade-off. And as a bit of background, you can add as well and possibly even evaluate. The Phillips curve doesn't really explain why, it just shows the trade-off. If you want an explanation, just think about AD, basically. If you reduce the price level, that can be achieved by falling AD, but then that's going to cause more unemployment if AD falls. Likewise, to reduce unemployment, AD could increase, but then that will increase the price level. So you can do possibly a bit more research, a bit more detail on this, but I think it's quite nice and easy because, again, all you really need to do is just remember what it looks like and explain the fact that there's a trade-off using the diagram. So once more, the evaluation is where things get a bit more interesting. So the evaluation here is the short run Phillips curve relationship breakdown in the 1970s. And remember, this is not, like I said, this is not like a theoretical model. This is literally just someone drawing a correlation. So what we mean here is this just stopped happening in the 1970s. What you had in the 1970s in particular was what we call stagflation. And stagflation is a combination of high unemployment and high inflation, particularly associated with supply side problems in the economy. So this stagflation that we experienced in the 1970s effectively just disproved the universality of the Phillips curve. It basically says the Phillips curve was true for 1960s, 1950s, whatever, but it's not always true forever. It's not something that is replicable over time. So basically the evidence does not match this the extrapolation of this to other time periods. And you can go into a lot more detail in this because there's actually a guy called Milton Friedman who predicted this breakdown. So a lot of economists kind of thought this was a universal rule, but this guy Friedman said, I think this is going to break down and we're going to experience stagflation. And he came up with this model with the long run Phillips curve to explain this. But be warned, the long run Phillips curve is, in my opinion, the most difficult thing on the AQA syllabus by a country mile. So I just even like the best students, like the A stars, like the Oxford students that we had last year, like even they didn't like using long run Phillips curve and were never going to use it unless they had to. So I'd probably advocate the same here. You'll learn about it later. You probably won't like it. We might cover it, we might not, because people typically don't use it anyway. So even when I cover it, it kind of feels like a poor investment of time. But if you want to have a look down that road, you can. Again, the long run Phillips curve is just a theory this guy Friedman made to predict the breakdown of the short run Phillips curve, and he was right. So obviously, knowing that can be used to evaluate the short run Phillips curve. All right, I think we're gonna have to call it a day there. There was only one more I actually wanted to cover, um, inflation trade, but hopefully you guys can work that out. I'll do very brief, like very brief analysis. Let's say you have deflation and you want to create higher inflation levels. You want to get back to your 1 to 3% target or whatever. Obviously, creating higher inflation because you're below target might hurt your trade. Okay, so if you create higher inflation, you might become less competitive. And if you create higher inflation through increasing AD, you will end up buying more imports as your economy grows, and that's going to harm your trade. So I know that was super quick, but again, rewatch the video maybe. So okay, the last thing I will talk about is equality. Notice I haven't spoken about equality at all in terms of conflicts, and that's deliberate. My personal preference is I wouldn't touch inequality or equality with a 10-foot barge pole. Um, even if they've never, like, just to be clear, they've never asked a question about equality specifically in conflicts between other objectives. Equality tends to be a topic for the micro papers all the time anyway, so it's never happened. In case it did, I probably just wouldn't do that question if they ask, like, how might achieving greater equality conflict with the other objectives. I could give it a try, and I think it would be a pretty good try, but it's almost like there would have to be a better, easier choice there. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, what a lot of the time when we're talking about equality as an objective, we actually mean equity, right? No government realistically, I think, is aiming for perfect equality, true equality, literal equality. What they're actually aiming for is equity, which really means fairness, which really means the best level of inequality. Like, what is the most fair level of inequality? So already you can see, like, this is complex, and it can mean you can do some really cool and interesting evaluations, but it's a lot more complex than doing the other conflicts, because you kind of got to differentiate in your essay between equality and equity. What you really should be assessing is equity, rather than equality, um, which is, a bit more challenging. And then the other thing about it is a lot of the relationships are not as straightforward as the other objectives anyway. Like the relationship between growth and equality, for example. Does growth create equality? Does growth create inequality? Don't ask me. Don't ask me. I read books about it, and it's one of my favorite topics to read about. Actually, I've probably read more books on equality and inequality than any other topic. That it's yeah, just the more I read about it, the more confused I get. So, and it's the same for the others, like equality and inflation. There's is difficult to get like the same just sort of straightforward points and evals we had for the other stuff. Which is not to say you can't read yourself and get some points down for this topic. I'm just telling you in advance, it's a bit of a tricky one. I personally have found it much hard to get my head around, and I have not seen an AQA conflicts between objectives question that forces equality anyway. So I've sort of just left it out.